Hey, it's Jessica from learnwithjpp.com. So I am back in my home office in Toronto, Canada, freshly returned from the Points of Light conference. These are my reflections from day 2 of the conference, which was Thursday for me. I want to start off with talking about the table talk that I joined in the morning, which was led by my new friend from Hands on Hong Kong, Lisa Lam. And we talked about partnerships. I learned from Rachel at Feeding San Diego that they have lots of partnerships with other agencies in the area because the people who go to mobile food pantries with Feeding San Diego, they might be looking for additional services like housing or literacy or employment. Sometimes those can turn into longer partnerships. So for example, in the summer when schools are closed, Feeding San Diego has a partnership with the libraries in their region. Children who are not getting their breakfast and lunch at school, they can be nourished through the food that's being handed out at the library. They had an agency summit that they organized, and they invited partner organizations to come. As we talked, I learned that they're not just collaborating externally, they're also collaborating internally with other teams at their organization. So for example, if there is leftover food that they can't distribute, they need to work with other teams across the agency to make sure that food gets redistributed to a partner, and that person who initially was handling the food and distributing it, whatever's left over, they may not have that contact at the partner agency that they need to get in touch with. And finally, one of the things that I thought of is when you're looking at partnerships, it's important to evaluate them, right? So one of the things I was thinking of is maybe putting together some sort of a rubric or some sort of an evaluation process to make sure that partnerships are on track so you can steer things back or reevaluate if everybody knows what the goals and objectives are for the partnership. There's less likely a chance of miscommunications or drifting away from the point of the partnership in the first place. I then went to a plenary about fostering civic pluralism, where I heard from Abu Patel from Interfaith America. He talked about acts of service across lines of difference. And he thought about it in the American context of a melting pot. Now, here in Canada, I was taught in elementary school that we don't think of ourselves as a melting pot like our neighbors down south. We more think of ourselves as a tapestry that we're weaving together. So he took the concept of a potluck instead of a melting pot and thought about how everyone can contribute a dish and how every dish that people are contributing is a source of pride. Now, at the same time, he did say the host's role is super important. Who's creating that spreadsheet to make sure that people are bringing different things? You have an assortment of appies, mains, desserts, proteins, carbs, fruit, all of that. And I think that's really our role as leaders of volunteers. Like hosting the potluck, our role is important to facilitate how people come together and volunteer. Now, a really good stat that he shared with us is that 70% of Americans want to bridge divides, but only 40% know how to do it on their own. This is from the More in Common report, which was published in March of this year. Now, the barriers that people said about why they can't bridge those divides with people who aren't like them is they don't know what others are going to think. They're scared. Also, it's uncomfortable to reach out from someone who's different from you. What if you say the wrong thing? What if you do something that is considered offensive for their culture or their religion and you're not aware with it? So again, that's what we as leaders, as volunteers need to do. We need to set those community norms and start the conversation. So then a few other folks came on to the plenary stage to share in a panel format, and they talked about their tips for service across differences. Now, one thing that really stuck out to me was that one of the panelists said, nobody really goes to a volunteer shift and goes, hey, what's your political affiliation? Are you red? Are you blue? We just look at each other across the table at the person next to us and we go, I showed up. You showed up. We both care about the same things. That came from the CEO of the independent sector, Kahl. The rest of that keynote was really about how trust can bring people together. And going beyond that surface level diversity to embed pluralism meaningfully. Instead of looking at outputs of hours and metrics, we need to start thinking about social trust, which was a perfect segue into the session I did later that day with Sue Carter-Kahl. If you've been following me for a while, you know I am a big fan of Sue. So Sue talked about kind of the consequences of the big three numbers that we measure in volunteering, which is how many volunteers, how many hours did they donate, and what is the economic value of that number. And she said, hey, there is a space for that. But what we can do instead of focusing on those big three numbers, which are usually what people on the outside of who is impacted by the work that the nonprofit is doing, that's what they want to see. Those are the board, the funders, people who are not as intimately affected by what is actually happening. Like program participants, service users, their caregivers, their families, volunteers, staff. So Sue got us to turn that inside out and really look at the center of the target, the person who is most impacted by the work. So instead of asking, how do I measure something? Let's start asking ourselves, how do I capture the impact? How do I reveal the impact? Focusing first on the people most impacted. So a person from the audience to give an example, and this person works at an organization that runs a sports program for people with special needs. Sue asked, what matters to those people with special needs who are participating in that sport? Are they smiling? Do they get social development? Are they feeling more confident about their skills over time? Okay, the next layer outside of that, what about their family, their caregivers? It shows that someone outside their family cares about this individual, which is important for both the participant and the family. Helps both the participant and the family see that, hey, this person is able to participate in something that many others around the world can do. It really normalizes having special needs. They have a little bit of respite, and as they're in the stands watching their child or person in their life with special needs participate in this sport, they know that they're not alone. They might be speaking to other people who are parents and caregivers and saying, hey, where are you going to after this? Where are you getting support for this thing? Oh, I want to share this resource that I found. That's really great. Now, there were a couple things that came out of this workshop discussion towards this end. So if you are working with a board, if you are working with funders who are like, I really want that hours data. I really want to know where my money's going. Am I getting the right return on investment? I've put in $50,000. What is the value of the volunteers' hours that they've put in? Sue encouraged all of us to ask questions and challenged assumptions. So if folks are asking, hey, I want that data, I want to see the hours, I want to see the number of volunteers, good question to ask is, what are you doing with that? Or you can even say, I don't understand why you're looking for numbers when we have all these great stories. We heard a few other stories from folks in the audience, and a report from Operation Breakthrough was mentioned. So this annual report was created by the children that the organization was serving instead of the marketing and communications team. So instead of producing something that came across as very sterilized, the kids wrote the report. They told people how volunteers showed up, what the impact on their lives was. Sometimes when we show real impact, it doesn't mean it's quote unquote professional. Now, I want to talk about one more session that I went to on Thursday, and that was with Lori and Bianchi. They were both local to Louisiana, and they talked about the disaster response that they coordinated and partnered with informal volunteer networks to make a success. So disaster response is one thing, but what these folks and their agencies really focused on was disaster preparedness and managing spontaneous volunteerism. They talked about how they partnered with different networks, get communities in Louisiana ready for disasters, because they're going to happen. A really great tip they gave was that all disasters are local. And one thing that more statewide organizations need to know is that you've got to let the local people lead instead of come in with a top-down mandate. They also provided some really great tips on how to train people to prepare for disasters. So the first one is, let's not just do training. If people are getting super involved, make sure that there are professional development scholarships available for them to go to conferences on emergency management. Now, specifically on lowering barriers in terms of language barriers, one thing that they recommended folks do is look at not just census data on what languages people are speaking, but also go to the local transit agencies, because those agencies need to communicate about how people get around day to day as well. Make sure you're bringing them to the table. And also saying, look, you don't need to be bilingual or trilingual to be ready to volunteer and prepare for disaster. If you only speak one language, whether that's Spanish, whether that's Vietnamese, whether that's Creole French, right? Our community still needs you. That's part of recognizing the inherent skills that people already have when they want to participate. Now, talking about language barriers, this was really important in that the place where these folks did training of volunteers, they asked the community to pick that space, to make sure that was a space that they felt safer in, that was a space that they were familiar with, whether it was somewhere they sent their child to school, whether it was a community center where they gathered. Instead of just picking a spot and asking people to come, collaborating with the community and asking them to pick that spot. And another thing that they said is they always expected more people to show up for training than had registered, because many people, they don't actually want to have their name on a list, but they are still interested in learning to help their community. Looking at lowering barriers for people who had disabilities, a few tips that we heard were going to places where people would evacuate to, or even cooling centers that would open up in heat waves, and asking those disability rights organizations to do a walkthrough and say, hey, this washroom is not wheelchair accessible. This is how you can make it accessible, right? These signs, this is how you can put Braille on them. This is something to do before a disaster even happens, so that when people are evacuating or going to sites to stay safe, they can be supported in the way that they need. Another thing to do with disability rights that I learned from here is in relation to the deaf community and the over-reliance on captions for communicating with that community. So for folks who are part of the deaf community, their native language isn't English. It's ASL. So that's why you will see ASL interpreters next to folks who are giving speeches about evacuation orders. Captions don't capture information in the same way. Another tip that they had was look for the leaders that already exist. They found one person who had started a Facebook group and really helped with spreading verified information, because in an emergency, there's always lots of disinformation. A third group that we talked about was rural communities. Louisiana is 70% plus rural. So it was really important when they were doing simulations to be able to know how to rescue animals. Because sometimes, yes, you got to rescue the people, but the people really care about their goats. And as part of that simulation, making sure that they have the trust that not just they're going to be safe, but their goats are going to be safe as well. I did attend one more session from Josh, who works with Habitat for Humanity International, but I want to debrief on that at the same time as I debrief on the session I did with Brianna, who is from Connecting the Cause. I've been a fan for a long time. Thank you so much for checking out my reflections. I'm Jessica from learnwithjpp.com. See you next time.